Hi, I'm Holly, I'm a writer, and today I'm talking classics. Specifically, I'm going to be going through a list of classics that I think are suitable for beginners, whether you're a young person who is looking to sort of maturify your reading and like read some of like the proper books, you know, or perhaps you're a reader who has read a lot of other stuff, you're an adult but you have never really known where to start with classics, you want to give it a go, and therefore this list is designed to be sort of easy. There are some that are a little longer, but most of them are pretty short, and I've got a little bit of poetry, a little bit of like plays, and then fiction basically. And so yeah, they're designed specifically to be the kind that you can read even if you've not really done a lot of classics reading, and especially because I know that with the rise of the BookTok sort of stuff, there are a lot of readers who are very snobby, and I think sometimes the way that they express their points is what makes it snobby, because I do believe, and bear with me on this, okay, I promise, but I do believe that there are good types of readers and bad types of readers, and I believe that the good kind compared to the bad kind are the kind who are willing to try things that they don't know if they're gonna like them, who are willing to read a book based off of like a different perspective than their own. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to read a book by somebody who has views that directly go against your own. But I think that, you know, there are a lot of, for example, men are less likely to read a novel if it's either written by a woman or if it has like a female main character. And that is probably part of why so many men are it's built into like the whole of society that men are misogynistic, right? Like the Louis Theroux documentary just came out, the Manosphere one. But we already knew that. We already knew that men hated women as a sort of general statement. And part of that is because when you read a novel from a viewpoint that isn't your own, you are experiencing a sort of worldview that you have never experienced before. And that can be based off of so many different things. It could be the gender, it could be the sexuality, it could be the person sort of writing it is from a different culture, a different country, a different part of the world, a different religion, basically anything. But that is what makes you a good reader, is a willingness to engage with things that sort of challenge you a little bit, whether that's, you know, your personal beliefs or your understanding of the world, things that deepen your understanding of your fellow human beings. And I think that we live in a literacy, like, I know that more people are reading than they sort of were a few years ago, shall we say, but the literacy rate is still going down. And it's because there is a difference between being able to understand words on a page and actually understanding them on like a deeper level, understanding things that aren't being explicitly said. And I think that classics are really good for if you want to develop that skill a bit more. And this is why I'm saying this, right? Like, this isn't from a place of judgment. This is from like the perspective of somebody who specifically studies books and whose whole life has always been books. And you know, it's just a fact that the literacy rate is going down, and therefore I think that a good reader is somebody who engages with these different topics and they sort of think about them rather than just forgetting them and moving on to the next thing. And that's for me the difference. I know that for some people it's just that if you've never read a classic then you're a terrible reader. That's not the energy that I want here. This is for anybody who is willing to get into classics and doesn't know where to start. And I just want to say, like, as a part of that, you know, books are very different from, I would say, even films. You know, I don't really love horror films because all of the horror films that I've seen of many different types, they just aren't that exciting to me. I just don't really get them very much. Like, there's very, very few horror films that I've enjoyed. Whereas with books, I don't think that there's any one genre that I don't like any book from. Because, you know, if you don't like a book from a genre or from a time period, whether it's because it was set in a time period or written in one, that doesn't mean that all of those books in that time period, all of the books in that genre are off limits. This is a list, and I need to make this clear now. You know, these are books that I can vouch for because I've read them. My own classics sort of tastes, they vary quite a bit, but you know, I'm still reading, like I'm still a human being. I'm still trying to read as many as I can whilst not rushing the experience. And so I have tried to pick ones that are enjoyable. I will say check the trigger warnings, especially with classics, because of the time period. There's a lot more casual stuff that could trigger you depending on who you are, what your experiences are, as well as just other stuff in general. But I think that, you know, if you don't like any of the stuff on this list, that doesn't mean that you can't like any classics. It just means that these aren't the ones for you. And I think that's worth noting. So I'm going to go into it. I've done it in order of length. So we're actually going to start with a poetry book. But this is Ariel by Sylvia Plath. You can actually read, I would say, any Sylvia Plath poetry. She is one of those poets who, if you hate poetry, you might like this. Do you know what else I should have put on here that isn't here? Let me just check. I might not do it. Bonus sort of recommendation. This is, it's long-ish. This is John Keats. This is all of his poems. If you like really old sort of romantic poetry, this is the kind of poetry that you're going to want to read, is John Keats. Or like Wordsworth. However, I do think that because of the way that they are written, while they are what a lot of people think of as being poetry, and therefore if that's what you want from poetry, you might like them. I do think it's important to just say that, like, they're the ones where you might have to look up a few words, which I think I've said this before. You should probably do that anyway. It increases your vocabulary, which is like a part of literacy. Personally, what I do is I look up a word if I don't know what it means. If I see that word again and I know like the vibe, but I don't know what it means exactly, like I've kind of forgotten, I look it up again. And if I see a word again that I know what it means, but I don't know the definition and I wouldn't know how to explain to somebody else what it means, I look it up. This is how we increase literacy on like a small level, so I would recommend doing that. And it's literally like, especially if you read like on a Kindle, that's going to be super easy. If you read like on Libby, the library app, they have a dictionary, or you can just use your phone. It's so easy in the modern day and age because you don't have to have like a physical dictionary. But I do recommend doing that. You don't have to. Or what you could even do is you could make a list at the side on like a piece of paper of all of like the words that you don't recognize in a reading session, and then do it afterwards. Yeah, I recommend doing that. But this is one that you shouldn't really have to do that for compared to other poetry books, because she was a modern writer, right? Her novel is on this list, I will say. But it's, again, I'm going in size order, give or take. But this is like just really simple. So I'm going to read Sheep in Fog for you. I'm really bad at reading poetry, but this is a shortish poem, as most of them are, so you hopefully will be able to get an understanding of why I'm recommending this as like a beginner text, which she is a classic writer. Her husband, Ted Hughes, I don't like him for so many reasons, but he also is an annoyingly good poet. But I refuse to own his books, even though they have really pretty covers. I may eventually if they work their way into charity shops, but I just can't do it. So this is Sheep in Fog. The hills step off into whiteness. People or stars regard me sadly, I disappoint them. The train leaves a line of breath, oh slow, horse the colour of rust. Hooves, dolorous bells, all morning the morning has been blackening. A flower left out, my bones hold a stillness, the far fields melt my heart. They threaten to let me through to a heaven, starless and fatherless, a dark water. It's a very simple style, And especially if you want to get into poetry and you don't really know that much, she uses a lot of like devices that you can look up what they are, what they usually mean, and it's just really simple. It's a poetry collection, it's pretty small. You could, if you were to just bang them out one after the other, get this done in a day. But also, if you wanted to take your time, you know, there's some that are longer. And as I said, there's just some that, you know, you could really enjoy them. I will say Sylvia Plath again is one that you do need to mark trigger warnings for, just in case. But, you know, as poetry goes, this is very accessible, in my opinion, for people who don't know that much about it, people who wish that they knew more, and she is such a big name in poetry that it is really worth looking her up. And then you'll be able to say, well, I don't know much poetry, but I do know a bit of Sylvia Plath. But yeah, I don't know what to say about that because it is poetry, so it's kind of hard. It's not like there's a plot. This next one is a play. However, I'm going to give a caveat to this. So this is Shakespeare, and this is specifically A Midsummer Night's Dream. This is my favourite of his, which is why I'm recommending it. It's also specifically like a comedy. He has, very famously, if you don't know Shakespeare, he has the tragedies, he has the comedies, and he has the histories. Histories I would stay away from if you're a beginner because they can be a bit boring because they are literally historical. The tragedies are really good, but they are a bit grim. Whereas the comedies, for example, A Midsummer Night's Dream, first of all, this has a film version. I think it has multiple film versions. It had a ballet. There are so many different films that you could watch of this. There are probably, almost definitely, because it's one of the more popular ones, audiobook versions that you could listen to while reading it. And most of this is like, let me actually show you. So including the cast and the name, like the actual that is the play. Ignore the stuff on either side, that is the actual play. It's not as long as it looks. This copy just has like a lot of notes at the bottom. These ones, for example, it has, this is the Oxford ones, they have like footnotes with stuff in it, but you can also, with Shakespeare, again, you can listen along to a cast reading, you can sort of watch the film to see how it would be performed. You could actually go and see the show after reading it and to see it come to life. Engaging with Shakespeare the way that it was meant to be, by reading it out loud, putting emotion into things, that is really beneficial if you want to get into Shakespeare but you feel like it's so dull. And then specifically like with Shakespeare, you can get like the dulled down versions of them. And I say that because obviously like there's the words, for example. So for example, it says here, I pray thee, gentle mortal, sing again. Mine ear is much enamoured of thy note. So is mine eye enthralled to thy shape, and thy fair virtues force perforce doth move me on the first view to say, to swear I love thee. This, like the language, I think A Midsummer Night's Dreams, it's a funny one. It is, for its time, very, I would say, ahead of it. Shakespeare in general was quite ahead of his time in a lot of ways. He had a lot of very strong female characters for a man of the time period that he was in. So it's a little enjoyable, but this one is like, it's great. There's some romance in this that is genuinely like so lovely. There's I can't remember the exact line, I can never remember the exact line to quote it, but there's a line from one of the characters to his girlfriend where he's like, the tears that you're crying are like watering the roses of your cheeks. Basically, she's crying and therefore she's watering the redness of her beautiful face, right? Like of her beautiful cheeks. The apple of her cheeks is like redness in a rosy, beautiful way, and she's watering them with her tears. I think that this is a really good one if you do want to get started in Shakespeare. And you can buy kids versions, you can buy school versions, and they do turn the sort of Shakespearean language into something a bit more enjoyable. Or if they don't transform the language itself, they have like my copy of Othello, for example. This is the copy. I don't really like this copy, but it was the same version that my school had, so I got it so that I could just be like the same page. But if I show you this one, Othello is also really good, but it is a tragedy and it's quite dark. As tragedies go, it really... Ugh. But for example, this is the text itself, and then this is all of the words, which, for example, let me see, nor ever heard, nor ever did suspect, nor ever is never not once, which is pretty obvious, right? But then you have yeah, so for example, the word bored, which is translated for you as a woman who runs a brothel. Yeah, and it just kind of, there's other words. I'm trying to find one because some of them are a little bit... Right, this one. Lest by his clamour, which means in case because of his shouting. So if you like sort of struggle with understanding what the language means and that's something that's putting you off, get a copy like this where it translates it for you, or gives you like the actual sort of modern version of a text instead of the Old English. Sometimes you can get ones where it's written not like this with notes on the side, but where like one side of the page is the Shakespearean and then the other page is like a modern translation of everything that he says. So it's really accessible if you do get like the right copy. And again, I do think that it's really important that you try and like engage with it in the way that they would have intended it. It was intended on the stage to be performed. Try reading it out loud. Try to go and see it. Try watching it. You can probably watch, I might leave a link to, there's an old version of the film, a really old version, which is, I'm pretty sure, free on YouTube. So you could like watch that. But A Midsummer Night's Dream I really recommend. And I just think that Shakespeare in general, like, people can be a bit afraid of him because of like the language and because he is obviously very old, but it really isn't as bad as it seems. Like, it's a fun time. He was funny, and especially if you have the translations to tell you exactly what a certain word means that we don't really use today, you're like, oh, he was just like being an absolute savage to these characters. This is another play. This is the last play, I think. Yeah. So there are only 2 plays and 2 poetry collections, which is fine. I think that's pretty good balance. And then a lot more books. But this is A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams. Now, first of all, Tennessee Williams was a queer writer. I'm pretty sure he was just gay. I don't think he was bi. Although obviously it's hard to tell because a lot of people in that time period, they would pretend to be bi because it was like more palatable for them to be in straight presenting relationships and stuff. So it's kind of hard to tell. But this is A Streetcar Named Desire. There is a film of this, which is very, very famous. This is one of those texts that it's going to be really easy because you can annotate this, and then there is like a million different companies that are going to do spark notes, sort of like, you know, talking about like the themes of each part of the show and the sort of significance of things. So you can test yourself by just trying it for yourself and then look it up and see what they say. And I think when you do that, when you like look up what other people think, that is a big part of it. That's what, you know, when you do a degree, you look up what other people say and you analyse their articles that they've written and their sort of dissertations that they've written, their essays basically. Engaging with what other people say and learning to look out for the things that they've mentioned, like the sort of understanding of how themes can be presented, of what a motif is. Stuff like that can really help you with literary criticism and analysis. This book is, I didn't tell you what A Midsummer Night's Dream is about. A Midsummer Night's Dream, if you don't know, it's basically about these two different couples that want to get married to each other, but their families want to set them up for different marriages. And so they run away from Greece. They're in Greece. They run away in the night, and they end up getting played with by this really mischievous fairy in the woods. And they get sort of dropped in their eyes with like a little potion thing that makes them fall in love with the first person they see when they open their eyes. And so they fall in love with the wrong people. And it's a mistake. It's supposed to be like, there's like the fairies who are trying not to do anything wrong. There's a guy who gets turned into, his name is literally Bottom, and he gets turned into a donkey because he's an ass, right? It's a joke, again, because it's very funny. But it's just chaos in every possible way. It's complete chaos. And then it's just kind of like a romantic thing between these people and about their families and about love. And it's just really fun. This is not fun. So sorry to go from that to this. It's a bit of tonal whiplash. But the rest of them are a little bit depressing, I'm not gonna lie. There is a theme. I do like depressing books, but this is about a woman who goes to stay with her sister and her sister's husband. Her sister's husband is a bit of a brute and she doesn't really like him, but also they have a really complex relationship, and he is very manipulative and her sister is very sort of weak and in love with him. And she tries to sort of save her sister, but in the process she's hiding a lot of things, and there's a lot of like foreshadowing and stuff in this one, which is part of why it's so good to annotate it and think about it and like theorize. And especially if you were to read this a second time, or if you were to watch like the film, for example, or a version of the show, it's a play again. This is just like incredible for the sort of way that things are slowly built up, and then you do get your answers, but also it is a tragedy. So it ends, one of the things of a tragedy, if you don't know, is that it doesn't end well for the main character, because it's like the falling of the hero is like the main thing, and sometimes that means death, sometimes it means other things, but this is one of the cases where it is a tragedy, so it doesn't go very well. It's kind of like watching a tram crash. I was thinking of the word, it's a streetcar. It's literally like the streetcars are like a tram is what we would call them in Britain. I think we don't call them streetcars really, but it's essentially that, right? But there's just a lot of stuff with this, and like a lot of like mystery that you sort of slowly come to terms with, and then you find out, and it's like, but it's really good. And it's Vivien Leigh and Marlon Brando in the film, which is like one of like the most famous films of all time. And I actually haven't seen it all the way through, but I did just buy it because it cost me like £1, the DVD. So I will eventually be watching, because I only watched like a little bit of it, but it's really good. And again, it's not super difficult to understand it because it is a modern piece. So you don't even need like a translated version for that. You can just get that one, and if you really want it, get one with notes and it will help. But again, you can watch the play, and I think it is important to note that in that medium especially, the play is super helpful. Don't be thinking that you're less of a reader if you need to have like a visual medium to help you understand something that was designed to be visual. There are a lot of stage notes in that, in the sort of decoration of, because it's very atmospheric, right? And that's kind of the point, is that it's very heavy on the atmosphere and the sort of oppression that is built into the sort of scenes, and that you sort of feel like almost like it's claustrophobic, and the characters are going through, and there's a lot of like mental health stuff. It's just great. So kind of similar, you probably know this one. I wrote an essay on this. so there's tabs in here. This, again, this is Metamorphosis and Other Stories. So the one that I'm recommending to you is Metamorphosis, which is literally like 30 or something pages. I may be wrong about that. Okay, let me see. So page 126 from page... Okay, so it's like 50 pages, but that's still, it's literally that much of the book. And then these are all the other, you know, short stories. So the whole collection is worth it. It's Franz Kafka. You've probably heard of him. He's one of those writers who is very depressing. He has like a specific sort of style of storytelling that's pretty grim. But The Metamorphosis, again, is a really good one for analysis and for thinking about it critically and like putting your own interpretations of it. Literally, it is about a guy who wakes up one day and he's like a big insect. The specific type of insect is never really explicitly mentioned depending on the translation, but he's sort of like usually described as being like a beetle or a sort of cockroach or something. It does depend on the edition that you have. This one, though, I recommend because, again, it's got other short stories in it, so you can say that you've read a fair bit of Franz Kafka. Some of them are literally just a page, less than a page long. So it's really easy, again, modern. He also wrote The Trial, and did he write a book called The Outsider? I think he did, and I always worry that I'm wrong about that because Stephen King also wrote one called The Outsider, but they're different, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, very bleak, but a lot to say about it. You know, it's about him turning into a bug, but like it's deeper than that, and I'm not going to talk about it because, again, I want to give you the sort of freedom to think for yourselves if that's what you want to do. But essentially there's like a lot about like family dynamics and sort of the world, you know, and society, and the way that you imagine that it is literal that he is an insect now and that he's just living life as a giant insect, but also think about it as like a metaphor, because it is. And so you can put a lot of thought into it, but also it's just kind of like absurd and really interesting, and it's one of those stories that is really famous and there's like references to it everywhere, especially on the internet. It's one of the stories that the internet really likes, along with Sisyphus, which I actually think he wrote a book about Sisyphus. Now that I'm Sisyphus, I don't like the way that I say sounds, and I don't think I really knew that until just now. Doesn't matter though. But yeah, I'm pretty sure did write that, or maybe somebody else wrote that, but I think it was him, which makes sense because, again, it's very thematic. But that is a really good kind of like absurd story that you can get a lot of like interpretation out of, and if that's like what you want to do, it's really good. It's pretty quick. It is like 50 pages, and again, there is a lot of stuff online that you can look up to see whether or not you were right, or to see what other people say about it that maybe you didn't think of. The next one I've recommended before. This is Animal Farm. This is a George Orwell. I recommend this over 1984 because 1984 is very different. It's a lot longer, and to be honest, I just didn't enjoy it as much. Like, it's a very important book, but I think that this one, in my opinion, it's just better. It's more fun. It's only like literally like 100 and something pages. I think 110 pages, essentially. This is an appendix. Don't think that this is the book that I'm scrolling through. Oh. It's 102 pages. So, and again, there is an introduction at the start, so you don't need to think that that is the book. That is the book. So it's even shorter than it already was. This is super, again, accessible. I feel like you would have to be really stupid not to be able to know what the words in this mean. And I don't say that in an insulting way. I know that it sounds like an insult, but I think we as a society, we overuse insulting words to the point that words that are more factual become insulting. So when I say idiot, I mean like literally like you haven't learned stuff. And that's not your fault. You can learn. I just think that there's not a lot of stuff in this that's very difficult to understand on the surface. This is a book literally about the Russian Revolution, but told through animals on a farm that decide to kick out the farmer because they don't like the way that they're being treated. And then as the story progresses, there's this specific, like, where's the quote? Yeah, so it's on the cover, it's not really a spoiler, but there's like a wall of rules that they write in it to sort of guarantee treatment of themselves. So this book deals a lot with the idea of, similar sort of to 1984, with the, you know, who controls the media is the one who controls the people. So like the rules, maybe just because they're written down doesn't mean that everyone's going to be able to prove that they were once different than they are today. So there's this one where it says all animals are equal. But then the pigs, as you can see, there's a pig on the cover. The pigs, they have like a system where they become like the leaders. And so as it goes on, it shows like corruption in leadership, and it is a criticism of like the Soviet Union, and like specifically the revolution and the parties who took over. But some animals are more equal than others. And it's like, well, it's written on the wall, right? So it's just really interesting, and there's a lot of stuff that happens in this that you can pull apart, but also at a surface level, it is just an enjoyable story that will resonate with so many people right now. Like I'm telling you, we are living in a society where, and we always have, right? Like the reason this was written is because of like a society where this stuff was prevalent, and he saw it and he was like, well, I want to criticize that. So it's not like this is new, it's not like it's revolutionary to say like this is reminiscent of what we're living through right now. But we are living through it right now. And I do want to just point that out because, you know, it is a bit bleak, but also it's bleak in a way that like books like this are important because we can stop ourselves from living through them, at the very least to as extreme of an extent. And so it's, you know, it's very current, and it has been very current for the last like 100 years, but yeah, I would give that a go because it is very short and very simple. Another one that is very simple but a little bit more confusing, I would say, is Slaughterhouse-Five. This one is super famous, okay? And again, this is all the book. It's not like there's an introduction or anything in this one. So it is a little longer. It's how many pages? Like 200? A little less than 200. It's like 160. But this is basically, it's Billy Pilgrim, right? This is, if you've ever heard the name Billy Pilgrim, this is from that book, okay? This is his book. And so basically this is about the Second World War and specifically the bombing of Dresden. The first chapter actually is, I think, essentially an author's note where the author, who was in Dresden and was a prisoner of war there and lived through everything that happened there, is like, I've tried to write this book a lot and this is the way that I've written it because this is the only way that I could make sense of it, and I feel like this is the only way that anybody could ever make sense of something that was on this level. If you don't know anything about Dresden, you can look it up beforehand. It will go into it in enough detail that you will grasp the extent of what was done. It was by the Allies. Dresden was in Nazi territory. And so it's about Billy Pilgrim, who is a soldier who he becomes a prisoner of war at Dresden and he survives. And then he goes home and he marries somebody and stuff happens in his life, blah, blah, blah. But the point is that there's like time travel, but the time travel is essentially, it's his PTSD. He is consistently drawn back in time to that moment and back into the sort of future of his like moment of death and all this sort of stuff, and it's like wibbly wobbly timey-wimey stuff, basically portraying the way in which the events of what happened when he was like a child essentially during the war have led to him being like as an adult, the extent of the damage done to him for living through these experiences. That's like it. And it wasn't my favourite book ever, but I really appreciated the way that it did it, and I think that it's such a classic that like if you've heard of Slaughterhouse 5 and you're thinking, well, I'm a little bit afraid to read it, it's supposed to be a little bit funny, it's supposed to deal with this super dense topic in a fairly light-hearted way, but also again there's a lot that you can analyse about it, and you can sort of speculate about how much of it really happened and how much of it was like a traumatized man. It gets a bit crazy, and there is some stuff that I didn't love, but there's also like fourth wall breaks where he talks about him, like the actual author of the book, and he's like, that's me. And it's very tongue-in-cheek, very classic him, but dealing with a very severe topic. And it's one that's not super talked about, or wasn't super talked about, and that's part of why he wanted to write a book about it. So yeah, it is a war book, but it's a very different war book than you might expect, and I would just recommend it for anyone who's kind of interested in reading like one of the classics of all time, who, you know, maybe was afraid of it before, because it's not that bad. It's not difficult to read. As I said, it wasn't like one of my favourite books that I've ever read, but I still enjoyed the process of reading it, and I'm still glad that I did. The next few are ones that I really liked, however. The Catcher in the Rye. This is one of those books that has been sort of... The internet got hold of it, and they've said that it's like a red flag if you like this book, because the main character is like misogynistic. However, the main character is like 15 or something years old. He's really young, he's a kid, and he is dealing with a lot mentally, and he goes through it during this book, and I feel like you have a lot of like a lot happens, but not a lot happens. Essentially, he's been kicked out of school. I need to reread this because we're actually doing a podcast episode on it. If you don't know, I have a podcast. And we're going to be talking about it in depth. But from what I remember, he gets kicked out of another school. And he decides to spend some time in like New York, I believe, before going home to be like a disappointment to his family. And I think maybe he's grieving a death of somebody. I don't really know. His name's Holden Caulfield, which a lot of people do know. No. Okay, I don't think he is grieving anything. But basically, he's just like a troubled teenager who is alone in a big city, and he's full of anger and, you know, pain. And I think a lot of people, when they say that it's a red flag, it ignores the fact that like when you're a teenager, you're still developing, you still have the potential to be a great person, and just because you have like some misogynistic beliefs, especially when you're in the situations that he is in, it doesn't necessarily mean that he is going to be misogynistic for the rest of his life. It just is like a portrayal of a young boy going through it, and it spans across like the day or two that he spends in New York avoiding his family because he's afraid to go home because he's gotten kicked out of school. Like, that's basically it. And so, you know, it literally, like, there's nothing that I can say about it without spoiling the specifics of what happens, but it's not a difficult novel to read. Again, it's very accessible in the way that it is written. It has got a slightly insufferable character, but also you should feel a lot of sympathy for him because he is a child going through it at the end of the day. And I feel like this is just one of those books that if you were afraid to read it because you thought that it was going to be like, you have to put your feminism card away to read it, you don't. It's actually really important to read books like this. I think because there's a reason that this is a classic, and that's all I'm going to say on it. And it's easy enough that, it is short. You could crank it out in a few days, regardless of how fast you read. It's so good and worth it. Please read it. Similar sort of thing for this one, but again, check your trigger warnings. The Bell Jar, Sylvia Plath. This is about a young woman. She's 19 years old. She's in New York for an internship for a fashion magazine thing, and she wants to be a writer, and she wants to do writing as a career, and she wants to do this writing course at a university, and she realizes that maybe she isn't that special because everybody else has all of the skills that she has, but they also have other skills. And she says, well, I'm going to learn this skill. I want to learn this skill. I've been thinking about it. But then she doesn't do it. And then she goes home from the internship starting to be kind of not great mentally. And then when she's at home, she essentially is stuck in that very real depression of wanting to do things, but there's no urgency, there's no direction, you don't know where you're going, you don't know why you're doing this, and when you try and do things, you just feel like there's no point, you feel bad at it, she starts to feel literally like she cannot even read words. That's how bad it gets. And essentially it's not really a huge spoiler. The Bell Jar, the name, comes from the fact that she feels as if she is trapped in a bell jar and there's no way out and there's no air coming in, and she's just suffocating slowly in her existence. And so she does attempt to take her own life. It is very rough if you are somebody who is triggered by that, which is why I say to check the trigger warnings, because there is some stuff in here that is I literally wouldn't even know what to tell you about who would be affected by some of the things in this. But basically it partly follows her journey to getting to that point, and then the sort of progression of her sort of being treated and being seen to and trying to take her own sort of control back of her life and take autonomy. We did also do a podcast episode talking about this. I say a lot of this sort of stuff in the podcast, but for an hour. So if you want to, again, if you're getting into analysis, you could listen to that. But this is also so popular that there are notes everywhere on the internet. And it's just a really, for the time period that it was written, it was a very phenomenal novel about women's mental health specifically, and about a women's role in society and how she's viewed and what her options are. And for example, at the beginning, she's sort of told that she could really benefit from going to secretarial school to get those skills. And it's really interesting that that is something that she would need, because a man wouldn't be told to do that, So there's a lot that can be said about this from a feminism perspective, but also in other ways, and it's one of the books of all time. Similar to The Catcher in the Rye, Slaughterhouse 5, it is one of those books that is consistently on the list that people make of books that you should be reading before you die. This next one isn't. This next one is in my opinion, criminally underrated. I recommend this to everybody because it's so good. But again, check the warnings. I sobbed when I read this. This is a tragedy. It's Flowers for Algernon. Essentially, Algernon is the name of a mouse who is used in a sort of lab experiment to make him smarter by doing brain surgery, experimental brain surgery. The surgery works, they see great results, so they bring in a mentally disabled man who hasn't progressed like, he's not capable of learning past, I don't know what level exactly, but he's very like naive to the world around him, to being like bullied. He doesn't understand that he's being bullied or made fun of. He can't spell or anything. Like, that's like a big part of it. The book, so okay, yeah, literally, the first, this is told through like diary entries. So the first one, it's Progress Report 1, March 3rd, but it is spelt Prog, R-I-S, R-I Port 1, and then March is spelt with a T between the R and the C. His spelling is really bad, his sense of punctuation and stuff like that is really bad. He knows how to spell some words, but not a lot. And then as he progresses, he gets this experimental surgery and he becomes smarter, and he develops a relationship with this mouse because they've both gone through this same procedure and they're both being tested and they're both essentially in the same position. And there's a lot in here about like ethics and morality, but also about humanity and like the effect that people's sort of intelligence has on their connections with other people, and in general the way that we connect with other people. I sob. I had to like stop reading this book because I was crying so hard that I couldn't even keep reading through it. I was like and then I lost my cat. My cat died, who I was reading this like right before he died. And he died in a way that like reminds me of this book. And I will say, I'm not gonna say what it reminds me of because I think it's a spoiler, but it reminds me of a certain type of disease that a lot of people get and that a lot of people will know people who've had. And it just, like, I think it would break me to read this again, because that's kind of what my cat went through when he died, in a way, and I feel like it's just really depressing, and I'm not mentally in a place where I could deal with that right now. But eventually I will reread this, because this is one of, I literally read this once, like 6 or so years ago. I think it was maybe 5 years ago, actually. I think it was 2021. And when I read this, I broke. Like, it changed every part of my brain a little bit, and I think about it all the time. And there's even, just to be clear, there's an episode, for example, of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where Charlie goes through, like, it's literally called like Flowers for Charlie, and it's a reference to this book. It's one of those books that is incredible, and it doesn't get enough flowers. I want to get a tattoo of this. I want to get a little white mouse holding a bouquet of flowers or something. I just think that's so cute, and I think I want the bouquet of flowers to be like my mum, my sister, my dad, my brother's favourite flowers, so that I have like one of their favourite flowers on me as like a little tribute to them as well. But this book is just, it's heartbreaking, and it's so interesting. And again, you don't have to be like, you don't have to feel like the most confident reader, because it's very easy to read, but also, you know, you progress with it and you become very attached to these characters, and it's just, it's beautiful. It's genuinely so lovely. And if you think that the trigger warnings are all right for you, I would recommend reading it, but also have the tears, you know, be ready for them. And don't stop them, because it's kind of impossible. But this one didn't make me cry, but this is, okay, this is going to be controversial, I'm going to say this now. This is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Very famous author. He wrote Blood Meridian, if you've ever heard of that. This is a post-apocalyptic novel about a man and his son surviving in this desolate wasteland of Earth, with like ash everywhere, perpetually grey sky, living off of like the things that they scavenge. And it's just a really bleak portrayal of the end of the world and a man's relationship with his son. But they're not ever called, they're not given names, they're just like the man and the boy or something. That's an intro. Yeah, the child. It's told, there's no chapters, so to speak, but there are like pretty significant amounts of page breaks where you could sort of stop, and essentially it's just about these two characters and the journey that they take to try and get somewhere safe, and him trying to save his son. And it's like this horrible, you know, it's about like the depths of humanity, very like if you like The Walking Dead, because of like the way in which people at the end of the world are pushed to be the worst versions of themselves, and what it takes to not fall into those sort of habits when everybody else is. You will like this. There's no speech marks. However, I didn't like that in Sally Rooney's, but in this one, all of the speech, like you can see it here, each line is given to a new person. There's not even like speech tags so much. Like they all, it's very clear, I think. If that's something that you're usually worried about, it didn't bother me. But I will say a lot of people don't like this, a lot of people do. It is very, very bleak. Cormac McCarthy, that is like his thing. But it was really interesting, and this is like, they got a film of this with Viggo Mortensen. Is that how you say his name? I think that is. But they got him for the film. I don't know if it's any good, but I know that there is a film version. And I think sometimes, again, that helps, depending on who you are. But it says on the back, in a burned out country, a father and his young son head slowly for the coast with no idea what, if anything, awaits them there. The landscape is destroyed, nothing moves save the ash on the wind, and cruel, lawless men stalk the roadside, lying in wait. Attempting to survive in this brave new world, the young boy and his protector have no choice but to keep walking. It won the Pulitzer. But yeah, it is just very, again, atmospheric. Like the way that this world is described is harrowing. Like the way that everything is. It is like the really grim episodes of The Walking Dead. And I think that's why I like it, because I like sort of horror that is more like about humanity being the horror in a world where something has gone very wrong, right? Like, you know, there's a zombie apocalypse, but people might be the biggest problem. That's kind of what this book is. And again, a lot of stuff happens, but I don't want to spoil, because it very much is about like the journey, which is why it's called The Road. You know, they follow the road, but also it is about like the journey along the road. But there's some really interesting stuff in there, and there's some bits where it's genuinely horrific. And I think that's the point, right? Like, it's kind of the beauty of a book like that, is that it gets to be super bleak, and yet you still are able to enjoy it. It's not for everybody, but if it is your kind of thing, it's like a staple. That's why it's a classic, but it is like more of a modern classic. This one I did for A-level, which is why there's so many. These do all have a colour code. So I couldn't tell you what the colour code is as of right now, but this is Brighton Rock, this is Graham Greene. I haven't read anything else by him, but I really want to, because this is really good. This is a crime fiction novel written, I think, in like the 30s, set in like the 30s, and essentially a man is murdered by a gang, and this gang, one of their members had been killed, and one of the other members, a young boy who is literally 17 years old, he takes over this gang, and he is reckless and scared and violent. And it's, you know, there's this woman who met this man before he was murdered, and she's like, he seemed like a good man, so I'm going to try and solve his murder. And so she is like essentially a sort of detective. She takes up that role, even though she isn't a detective. And she takes up the role of detective whilst also this young boy, you know, who she is basically like trying to find him as like the murderer, he meets this young girl who he kind of like falls in love with, but also it's like really complicated. And it's a book about like the crime, but it's also, again, it's about like being in over your head. It's about, there's a lot of like religious themes and a sort of naivety to it on a lot of people's parts. And it's just like a really interesting crime book. But there's just so much to it, like I don't even know what I could really talk about. You know? Like, you've got this woman who's just trying to solve this murder because she's like a good-hearted person who feels like she owes it to this man that she met like the day that he was killed. And you know, you have this young boy who's panicking, and he's like a part of like a mob, but not the mob. And he's trying to run this gang, but he's a kid and he has no idea what he's doing. And none of his men really have faith in him because he's a kid. And so it sort of spirals out of his control, but he refuses to acknowledge that. And there's just like, it's just great. But if you like crime fiction, this is a really interesting one. And two of the main characters are women, of like the three main characters that really exist. And the young girl, you can really root for her because it's just really sweet, you know? And he literally says to her, who says this to her? Let me see. It might be her. The woman and the girl meet, I'm pretty sure, without knowing. And essentially it's like corruption in every form, literally every single form. There's a lot of discussions of like poverty and about like the reasons why people turn to crime, especially young children who get in way of their heads. And again, I just feel like this is super relevant now because you have, especially in Britain, in America obviously gun crime is like the biggest one, but in Britain, young lads especially, they carry knives and they go out on town, and because they're carrying a knife, they are more likely, like if you carry a weapon, you are more likely to be hurt by that weapon or by somebody else with a weapon than if you don't. But they get dragged into it, and it's about like the culture that leads them to that. And I feel like this book touches a lot on like that sort of idea, and it's really relevant in that way. But also it's just generally like a really good crime fiction book if you don't care too much to look into that sort of stuff. So again, I do recommend it, and like you can literally see how creased the spine is. I cracked this bad boy open, but it's not too long. It's literally like 300 or so pages, I think, and it's set in an older time, but it's got very modern writing, so again, super accessible. Same for this next one. You've probably heard of this. This is the Book of the Queen's Gambit. Now this was released, I think, in like the 60s, maybe the 50s. Oh, 1983. Crazy. This is literally, if you've seen the show, it is almost exactly the same. The only thing that they really changed, I understand why they changed it, but it's literally like one or two things. It's very like as adaptations go, fantastic. This is, so yeah, if you've seen the show or if you never watched the show, this, if you don't know, it is about a young girl who ends up being, she goes to an orphanage because of, check the trigger warnings. But she ends up at an orphanage, and life is really difficult there. The children are fed these pills, and she basically becomes like addicted to the pills, but she discovers chess and she's really good at it, and she becomes a very famous chess player. And it essentially is about how chess is something that she relies on in an unhealthy way, and how she has like an addiction, and how she grows as this woman who goes through a lot throughout her life into adulthood, like her mother, her adoptive mother, the relationship there is really interesting. Like there's definitely love, but it's a really interesting kind of love, and it's just like you feel really sorry for her, but also it's just so interesting. I don't know what to tell you. If you've never seen the show, read this then watch it, because as I said, the show is basically perfect as like for an adaptation of anything ever. It is so bang on that I think that it might be like the best adaptation of anything of all time. Genuinely, that's like the way that I feel about it. But it literally is just about, again, a lot of things, but like more deep than they seem on the surface. So like a chess player with an addiction and a complicated family life situation, but there's a lot that goes into it, and it just is so much more fascinating than you might think. And the presentation of the book's really cute. Like there's like the little on the chapter titles, the chess pieces and stuff, and again, super accessible. I recommend all of his books. You can get matching covers for all of them as well, but he has also written into like the sci-fi genre. So if you want to read like a classic author but you don't want to read The Queen's Gambit or the other ones which are about a pool player, you can read his like science fiction, which is also quite highly rated, like especially one of them that I can't remember the name of right now. But it's a really interesting book, even if it doesn't sound like it. The next one is the longest on the list, and it is quite long, like as books go. However, do not be afraid, okay? Would I lie to you and tell you that this is super easy and then it not be super easy? No. This is The Three Musketeers. Now, you've almost definitely heard of this, and if you've never read it, you're probably thinking, that seems super serious and scary and old. I don't know how I'm going to read that. Don't think that, okay? I read this when I was like 8 years old, give or take, and I had watched Barbie and the Three Musketeers. I loved it, and that's why I got it. That's why I read it, because I wanted to see what the source material was. And then as an adult, I reread it. I think I read the abridged version as a kid, maybe, or something, but it is long. I'm not going to pretend it's not long, and I understand if that puts you off. However, let me read, because this is, it's French originally, right? So it is a translation. And I think that it is really important that you understand that, because different translations are going to be slightly different. But first of all, it is funny, okay? His books are funny. They are like a romp. The Count of Monte Cristo, very long, over 1,000 pages. So fun though, like so worth it. Just because it's long, you shouldn't be intimidated. Like, yes, it's going to take you a longer time to finish it, but his writing style is wonderful. Like, it's so good. So this is like the first chapter, right? On the first Monday of the month of April 1625, the village where the author of The Romance of the Rose was born seemed to be in as total as an upheaval as in the Huguenots who had come to make a second La Rochelle. Many of the townsmen, seeing women fleeing along the main street, hearing children crying on the doorsills, hastened to put on their breastplates and, backing up their somewhat uncertain countenances with a musket or a partisan, headed for the Jolly Miller Inn, before which jostled a compact group, noisy, full of curiosity, and growing every minute. Now, maybe that sounded a little complicated, I don't know. It is French, so you might have to look up a few terms, like places, or like, for example, they don't write Mr., they write M for Monsieur and Madame and Mademoiselle. But when you get like the grip of that, it's fine. And like, if you don't know how to say like the names and stuff, you can just look it up. But also like, this. So this is like the whole plot of the book, is that the main character, who becomes one of the musketeers, has this sort of little, he's very proud, he's like 19 years old, he's moving to Paris to become a musketeer, and he has a horse that is very yellow. It's like butter yellow, it's like this colour. And so he meets this person who he becomes like an enemy of this person just because this person laughs at his horse. So yeah, so he yeah, hiding there behind that shutter. Yes, you, tell me a little of what you're laughing at and we'll laugh together. I am not speaking to you, monsieur, but I am speaking to you, cried the young man, exasperated by this mixture of insolence and good manners, of propriety and disdain. The unknown man looked at him an instant longer with his slight smile, and withdrawing from the window, slowly came out of the inn to approach within 2 steps. This horse is decidedly, or rather was in its youth, a buttercup, the unknown man picked up, continuing the investigations he had begun. It is a colour well known in botany, but till now extremely rare among horses. He laughs at the horse who would not dare laugh at its master, cried the furious emulator of Treville. I do not laugh often, monsieur, as you can see yourself from the look of my face, but I nevertheless intend to keep the privilege of laughing when it pleases me. And I do not want anyone to laugh when it displeases me. So it's just really, like dumb, but in like a really funny way. So I understand that you probably think, but like, yeah, that is literally the main guy, right? That is like the antagonist of the story, is like this guy and his company. And it starts because he laughs at his yellow horse. Like, it's not serious, it's not too like difficult to read, it's fun, it's got like stuff in it that's like haha. Let me find some of the stuff that I found like really dumb. There's literally like a scene where, because I started highlighting stuff, I was like, you know what, I don't care, I need to highlight this. That's just me because I have a favorite character. There was a line, I feel like it kind of, because there's basically, yeah, so this is, one of them is like a poet, right? And so I'll read you the first canto. It's 400 verses long and takes 1 minute. Like, that's, I'm sorry, but that's funny to me. Stuff like that. Since I'm too good a Catholic to blow my brains out with a pistol. You are Madame's brother, so be it, but fortunately you are not mine. Like, it's so, like, this is just like, it's fan fiction of the French politics of the time period that it's set in, right? It's like got like gossip vibes, and I stand by that. That is what his books feel like. It's gossip, it's fun, it is like a romp, it is, you know, it's an adventure novel, but that's kind of crazy. And I think that if you really like that sort of stuff in like modern fantasy, for example, you like sort of funny fantasy adventure books, you might really like this. It is long, it is set in a long ago time period, it is set in France, it is translated from France, from French, but it's so good. Like, I literally, it's so great. And a lot of the chapters aren't that long, so if you don't love long chapters, there are a lot of them. There's like 100 chapters, I think, and it just, it keeps going. It's incredible, and I recommend it so wholly. And the last one, again, I'm not going to talk too much about this one. This is Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. And this is the copy that I wanted to pick up purely because the other copy was on a shelf that I took a few things from. But this is just poems. This is a really influential book of poems. This one is the one where there's a lot in here. Song of Myself, right? Page 30. Okay, so Song of Myself is one of the more popular ones by Walt Whitman. I'm going to read just the first bit. I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. I loaf and invite my soul, I lean and loaf at my ease, observing a spear of summer grass. My tongue, every atom of my blood, formed from this soil, this air, born here of parents born here from parents the same, and their parents the same. I now 37 years old, in perfect health begin, hoping to cease not till death. Creeds and schools in abeyance, retiring back a while suffice to what they are but never forgotten. I harbour for good or bad, I permit to speak at every hazard, nature without check, with original energy. So there's a lot of poems in this, but this is like a slightly older style of poetry, but it's still not too difficult to understand, and it's beautiful, and it is like one of the most definitive books of poetry in like American sort of, you know, the lit canon, shall we say. No, we shouldn't. The literary canon. I'm sorry, I'm not gonna say. But yeah, I'll read Pensive and Faltering because it's literally 5 lines. Pensive and faltering, the words, the dead, I write, for living are the dead, haply the only living, only real, and I the apparition, I the spectre. It's just really, like, if you want to get into poetry again, this is a good book to do it. This is a good, like, collection, and it's one where, again, I feel like it's accessible and you can understand, even if some of the language isn't like the stuff that we would use every day. It's close enough that you get it. You don't have to be like, what does that mean? But yeah, that is the last one. That is the last recommendation. That was a total of 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 books. So hopefully that's something that, you know, you can find something on this list and give it a go. Let me know if you do read something and you like it. The idea of somebody taking a book recommendation from me and then actually really enjoying it, I always get a bit like, because that's my thing. I used to work in a bookshop. I used to do that professionally. Love it. I love recommending books to people, and I know that I can have, in a way, both a really wide but also very specific sort of focus when it comes to what I read. As I said, a lot of these are quite depressing, but I think that ultimately they're books that I really love, and I think that they're really good books regardless of, you know, the fact that they might seem intimidating. I think that they're worth picking up and giving a go, because if you don't like them, it means that you didn't like that one book, you know. It doesn't mean that you're not able to read classics and enjoy them. But if you do give them a go and you do like them, and it's like your first time reading a classic, or your first time really trying to read and enjoy a classic, or to sort of pick apart and understand what's going on in one, I hope that you enjoy it. What time is it? I literally think I've been filming for like an hour, so I am gonna end it, but I actually don't think I've been filming for as long as I think I have. So go me, if that's true. I might be wrong. I may have been doing this for over an hour, but enjoy your recommendations. And just again, remember that it really doesn't matter. Like, the whole, you know, thing about like people saying that like you're not a proper reader if you don't read classics and stuff. To me, the best thing that you can do as a reader is try to be willing, you know, to give things a go, even if you don't know if you're going to enjoy them. And if that means that you pick up one of these books, I commend you for that. I think that is something that you should feel good about yourself for doing. And I'm not going to criticize you if you don't like these books. I'm not going to criticize you if you decide that classics maybe just aren't for you. You know, you gave it a go. And I think that's all that really matters. And yeah, I hope that you find something from this, even if it is literally just the sort of permission from a literary individual to be like, okay, I can stop trying to read books that I'm not enjoying. But yeah, thank you for watching, and bye.